Madam Speaker, forgive me, former Speaker Pelosi, allow me to inquire about the date of December 15th, 2020. On that specific morning, you were in attendance at a classified briefing regarding Operation Warp Speed and the logistics of vaccine distribution. Later that very afternoon, your husband, Paul, purchased $5 million worth of Pfizer call options. The very next day, the FDA publicly announced emergency approval for the Pfizer vaccine. Your husband realized a profit of $7 million in a mere 48 hours. Is this merely a coincidence? The voice of FBI Director Kash Patel filled the House Oversight Committee hearing room, calm and clinical, resonating with the tone of a prosecutor who had spent 8 months meticulously constructing a case and understood precisely how robust it was. Silence, complete and heavy, descended upon the room. Nancy Pelosi sat at the witness table, flanked by 3 high-priced attorneys dressed in expensive suits. She was 85 years old now, no longer the speaker, yet still carrying herself with the authority of someone who had been the most powerful woman in American politics for 2 decades. Her signature suit was perfectly tailored, her hair styled impeccably, serving as the armor of someone who had stared down presidents and survived every conceivable political attack. However, something was distinctly different today. She looked uncomfortable, perhaps even trapped. This was because Kash Patel had not arrived with political speeches or vague accusations. He had arrived with evidence, including trading records, phone logs, time-stamped congressional calendars, and bank statements. The variety of evidence that one cannot simply spin away. The hearing room was packed, despite officially being a closed-door session, with every seat occupied by committee members, staff, and investigators, while cameras rolled for the congressional record, even though the public would not see this footage immediately. The press remained locked outside, but waited like sharks, sensing that something momentous was occurring inside. This was ostensibly supposed to be routine testimony regarding stock trading reform, as Republicans had taken the House in the 2024 elections and immediately launched investigations into various matters. Pelosi had testified before Congress dozens of times over her 40-year career, and she had expected this to be yet another session of political theater she could deflect with practiced ease. Instead, she had walked into a prosecution because Patel had done something nobody had done before. He had actually traced the money, actually mapped the timeline, and actually built the case. Pelosi's lead attorney, Marcus Stein, the sort of lawyer who charged $2,000 an hour, leaned forward to speak. Director Patel, my client's husband makes his own independent investment decisions. Mrs. Pelosi is not involved in his trading activities. Your client's husband is 85 years old. Patel interrupted smoothly. He holds a degree in business from Georgetown from 1965. Yet, he is not a professional trader, nor is he a financial analyst. Yet somehow, over the past 15 years, he has executed 138 stock trades that occurred within 1 week of your client attending classified briefings or receiving material non-public information. 138 trades with an average return of 41%. Warren Buffett, arguably the greatest investor in history, averages 20% over his career. Paul Pelosi is apparently twice as proficient as Warren Buffett. He paused to let that impossibility sink in, but only on certain trades, specifically the trades where your client possessed inside information. On trades where she had no informational advantage, Paul Pelosi averages 8% returns, which is slightly below the market average. Therefore, he is either a below-average investor who occasionally becomes the greatest trader alive through sheer luck, or he is trading on insider information provided by his wife. Which explanation makes more sense? Patel retrieved a document and slid it across the table. Let me demonstrate the pattern. March 2020. Mrs. Pelosi attends a classified briefing on the severity of COVID-19 and its economic impact. The briefing details exactly how dire the situation is going to be, information the public does not have yet. 2 days later, Paul Pelosi sells $5 million in airline stocks, hotel stocks, and cruise line stocks. 1 week later, the economy shuts down, and those sectors crash. He avoided $1 million in losses that average investors suffered. Another document. June 2021. Mrs. Pelosi is in closed-door negotiations on the infrastructure bill and knows which companies will receive contracts. Information that has not been made public. 1 day later, Paul buys $2 million in Caterpillar and Tesla stock. 2 weeks later, the infrastructure bill passes with provisions specifically favoring those exact companies, and he makes $1.8 million. Another, November 2021. Mrs. Pelosi is working on the semiconductor subsidies bill. Paul buys $4 million in NVIDIA call options. The bill passes months later with billions in subsidies for chip makers, and he makes $3.2 million. Patel looked up from his documents. 138 times, Madam Former Speaker. Every time you possessed advanced information about legislation, about government contracts, or about regulatory decisions, your husband traded on it. Every single time. That is not coincidence. That is not luck. That is systematic insider trading on a massive scale. Pelosi's face was flushed now, and her hands gripped the edge of the table. She had been in politics since before Patel was born. She had survived Republican attacks, Tea Party insurgents, the Trump presidency, and countless ethics complaints. She had always emerged on top through a combination of political skill, media savvy, and sheer force of personality. But this was different. This wasn't political theater. This was mathematics, timestamps, and bank records evidence that couldn't be explained away with a carefully crafted soundbite. "This is a partisan witch hunt," she started, her voice tight. "This is FBI financial forensic analysis," Patel said calmly. "This consists of subpoenaed bank records, trading records, phone logs, and time-stamped congressional calendars. We possess the exact time you entered classified briefings, the exact time you called your husband, the exact time he called his broker, and the exact time the trades executed. This isn't partisan, Madam Former Speaker. This is evidence." He pulled out more documents, charts, and timelines. "You and your husband entered Congress in 1987 with a net worth of approximately $5 million. You are now worth $240 million on a congressional salary that has never exceeded $223,500 per year. Even if you saved every penny, which you didn't, and even if you paid no taxes, which you did, and even if you had perfect investment returns, you could not possess $240 million unless you were trading on insider information for 35 years. The room was completely silent now, with every eye on Pelosi and every ear listening to Patel's calm, relentless presentation of facts. "Let me show everyone exactly how you did it," Patel said. "Let me show you 15 years of insider trading, $140 million in ill-gotten gains, and the phone calls where you passed the information to your husband right after leaving classified briefings." Pelosi looked at her lawyers, at the committee members, and at the cameras recording everything for history. And for the first time in her long political career, she looked like what she was: caught. To understand how we arrived at this moment, how the woman who had been third in line to the presidency for years ended up in a congressional hearing room unable to explain her husband's impossibly perfect trading record, you have to go back 6 hours earlier. 6 hours earlier, Nancy Pelosi sat in her personal office in San Francisco, 3,000 miles from Washington, reviewing notes for her testimony. It was early morning, 8 a.m. Pacific Time, and her flight to D.C. left at noon. She had 4 hours to prepare for what she thought would be a routine harassment session by Republican committee members trying to score political points. "They have nothing," Pelosi said to her legal team gathered around her desk, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had survived 4 decades in politics. "This is Jim Comer trying to make headlines, trying to make me look bad. But there is no crime here. Paul's trades are all disclosed as required. Everything is legal." Marcus Stein, her lead attorney, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit, the kind of D.C. lawyer who defended senators and cabinet secretaries, nodded in agreement. "The subpoena is broad, but we have multiple privileges to invoke. Spousal privilege protects your private conversations with Paul. Legislative privilege protects your congressional work. We don't have to answer questions about what you discussed with your husband or about your legislative strategy." Sarah Kim, another attorney, was reviewing the Stock Act requirements on her laptop. Stock trading by members of Congress is legal. Spouses can trade. The Stock Act just requires disclosure within 45 days. We've checked, and all of Paul's trades have been properly disclosed. Some were late, but we paid the fines. They can complain about ethics, but nothing was technically illegal. Pelosi's chief of staff, Jennifer Martinez, looked less confident. "What about the timing? Some of these trades look really suspicious. Paul, buying Pfizer, right before the vaccine approval. Selling airlines right before COVID crashed everything. The Republicans have been building timelines." Stein waved dismissively. "Timing isn't proof of anything. Sophisticated investors make educated guesses based on publicly available information. Paul reads the Wall Street Journal. He watches financial news. He can make his own investment decisions without insider information." Pelosi nodded, sipping her coffee. She had been through worse than this. Multiple ethics investigations over the years, Republican attacks, calling her everything from socialist to corrupt, media scrutiny of her wealth, nothing had stuck. She was Nancy Pelosi, the first female Speaker of the House, the woman who had stared down Newt Gingrich, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. She had lived through Clinton's impeachment, Bush's wars, Obama's health care reform, Trump's impeachments, and Biden's agenda. She had survived everything, and this would be no different. What she didn't know was that while she had been focused on political survival, on managing her image, and on crafting sound bites for cable news, Kash Patel had been building something very different. Not a political case, but a criminal case. 8 months of FBI financial forensics, subpoenas to brokers, phone records, trading timestamps, cross-referenced with classified briefing schedules. Patel had done what nobody had bothered to do before: actually follow the money with the full resources of the FBI. At that exact moment, 3,000 miles away in FBI headquarters in Quantico, Virginia, Kash Patel sat in a secure conference room reviewing the final evidence package with his financial crimes team. The walls were covered with charts showing 15 years of trading data, phone records, and congressional schedules, all color-coded and cross-referenced. He looked like what he was: a former federal prosecutor who had made his career building airtight cases against white-collar criminals. Dark suit, glasses, tie slightly loosened, surrounded by evidence binders organized with the precision of someone who knew he would be defending every claim in front of skeptical audiences. His lead investigator, Sarah Chen, stood at a whiteboard covered in timelines. She was in her 40s, a former SEC enforcement attorney who had moved to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She had built cases against hedge fund managers, corporate executives, and Ponzi scheme operators. This case, involving a sitting member of Congress engaging in systematic insider trading, was the biggest of her career. "Let me walk you through the final package," Chen said, clicking through slides on a screen. "We have 15 years of trading records, 387 total trades by Paul Pelosi. We have analyzed each one, cross-referenced with Nancy Pelosi's congressional schedule, classified briefing logs, committee hearing dates, and legislation she was working on." She pulled up a chart. Of those 387 trades, 138 show clear correlation with Nancy Pelosi receiving material non-public information. The pattern is undeniable. Average time between her receiving the information and Paul executing a trade is 2.7 days. Not the same day that would be too obvious. Not weeks later, the information would be public by then. Specifically 2 to 3 days. The sweet spot where it is close enough to capture the gain, but far enough to create plausible deniability. Patel studied the chart and the returns on the 138 suspicious trades, average return of 41%. On the other 249 trades, the ones where Nancy had no information advantage, the average return is 8.2%, slightly below market average. She let that sink in. So Paul Pelosi is a below-average investor who occasionally becomes the greatest trader alive. The only difference is whether his wife had inside information. That is statistically impossible to explain without insider trading. Tom Rodriguez, a former federal prosecutor now working as FBI legal counsel, spoke up from his seat at the table. "We also have phone records subpoenaed from both their carriers. In 64 of the 138 suspicious trades, this exact pattern appears. Nancy attends a classified briefing or sensitive meeting. Within 2 hours, she calls Paul. Within 1 hour after that call, Paul calls his broker at Morgan Stanley. Within 24 hours, the trade executes." He pulled up call logs. Here is December 15th, 2020, the Pfizer trade. Nancy enters a classified briefing on Operation Warp Speed at 9 a.m. The briefing ends at 11:45. She calls Paul at 12:17 for an 11-minute call. Paul calls his Morgan Stanley broker at 1:03 p.m. for an 8-minute call. The trade executes at 2:30 p.m. $5 million in Pfizer call options. The next day, the FDA announces approval. The stock jumps, and Paul's options are worth $8.7 million. Profit, $3.7 million in 48 hours. He looked up. The timing is perfect. Impossible to explain without Nancy telling Paul what she learned in that classified briefing. Patel reviewed the evidence systematically. This was how he had built his reputation. Meticulous preparation and overwhelming documentation, creating cases so airtight that defendants pleaded guilty rather than risk trial. "Give me the top 5 most egregious examples," he said, "the ones that are absolutely impossible to explain away." Chen clicked through slides. Number 5. January 2021. Nancy, in negotiations on EV tax credits, knows Tesla will benefit. Paul buys $2 million in Tesla calls. Bill passes with provisions helping Tesla. Profit, $1.4 million. Number 4. March 2020. Nancy, in classified briefings on COVID economic impact, Paul sells $5 million in airlines, hotels, cruise stocks before the market crashes. Avoids $2.1 million in losses. Number 3. August 2022. Nancy planning Taiwan visit. Knows this will impact semiconductor stocks. Paul buys $4 million in NVIDIA before she announces the trip. Profit, $3.2 million. Number 2. July 2021. Nancy, negotiating infrastructure bill, knows which companies get contracts. Paul buys Caterpillar, Tesla, construction companies. Profit, $4.8 million. Number 1. December 2020. Nancy in classified briefing on Pfizer vaccine approval. Paul buys 5 million in Pfizer calls that same afternoon. FDA approves next day. Profit. 3.7 million in 48 hours. Patel studied each example. The Pfizer one is the smoking gun. The timing is impossible to explain any other way. Classified briefing in the morning, trade that afternoon, approval announcement next day. That's not sophisticated analysis, that's insider information. What about defenses? He asked. What will they claim? Rodriguez had anticipated this. 1. Paul Pelosi is a sophisticated investor, making his own decisions. We counter with his performance on non-insider trades, which is below average. He is only sophisticated when Nancy has inside info. 2. Spousal privilege protects their conversations. We counter that privilege doesn't cover criminal conspiracy. If she is passing him insider information to trade on, that is a crime. 3. All trades were disclosed per the Stock Act. We counter that disclosure doesn't make insider trading legal. You can't legally insider trade and then avoid prosecution simply by filing a form. 4. It is all coincidence. Timing is just luck. We counter with 138 examples. That isn't luck. That is statistically impossible. Chen added, we also have Paul's broker. We gave him immunity in exchange for testimony. He will testify that Paul specifically mentioned Nancy's information multiple times. He kept notes, direct quotes like, Nancy says the infrastructure bill will pass with these provisions, or Nancy says regulation will be lighter than expected. That is direct evidence of tipping. Patel sat back. How are we presenting this? Rodriguez outlined the strategy. We start with the impossible math. Show her net worth growth is inexplicable on a congressional salary alone. That establishes motive and requires explanation. Then, we show the pattern. 138 trades, all perfectly timed, all highly profitable, all correlated with her receiving non-public information. That establishes the scheme. Then phone records show the information flow. Briefing to Nancy. Nancy calls Paul. Paul calls broker. Trade happens. Market moves in their favor. That proves the mechanism. Then, specific examples. Hit her with 5 trades that cannot be explained except by insider information. Make it concrete and undeniable. Finally, the question she can't answer. How did Paul know? How did these coincidences keep happening? Force her to either admit it or take the 5th. Patel reviewed his notes one final time. She is going to claim this is partisan political persecution. Let her, Chen said. This is math. This is forensic accounting. This is time-stamped phone records. You can't spin your way out of timestamps. At 11 a.m. Pacific Time, Nancy Pelosi's motorcade left her San Francisco office for the airport. She was reviewing talking points on her tablet. Key messages. My husband makes his own investment decisions. I am not involved in his trading. All disclosures were filed as required. This is political harassment. She felt confident. She had testified before hostile committees before. The trick was to stay calm. Stick to your talking points and not let them rattle you. Answer the question you want to answer, not the question they ask. Run out the clock. Make it boring. The press would cover it for a day and then move on to the next thing. She had no idea that in 6 hours she would be taking the Fifth Amendment to avoid incriminating herself, that her attorneys would be frantically whispering damage control strategies, and that the evidence would be so overwhelming that even her allies would have trouble defending her. At 2 p.m. Eastern Time, the House Oversight Committee hearing room filled up. Committee members taking their seats, staff arranging documents, court reporter preparing stenography equipment, cameras being positioned. This was officially closed door, but would be recorded for the congressional record and potential public release later. Chairman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, entered with his chief counsel. He had been planning this hearing for months. Ever since taking the gavel, he had wanted to investigate Pelosi's trading, but he had needed ammunition, needed more than just suspicious timing. He needed actual proof. That was when Kash Patel had approached him. I have 8 months of FBI financial investigation, full forensic analysis, phone records, trading timestamps, broker testimony, everything you need. Let me present it at your hearing. Comer had jumped at it. Having the FBI director present evidence gave this gravitas. It made it more than just partisan accusations. It made it a criminal matter. At 2:15 p.m., Nancy Pelosi entered the hearing room with her 3 lawyers. She looked composed, ready. She took her seat at the witness table, arranged her notes, whispered briefly with Stein. The room settled. Cameras started recording. Chairman Comer brought the hearing to order. This closed-door testimony session will come to order. We are here to examine potential violations of ethics, rules, and insider trading laws related to stock trades by members of Congress and their immediate family members. Standard opening, but then, we have a special witness today. FBI Director Kash Patel has been conducting a financial investigation at the request of this committee. His team has analyzed 15 years of trading records, phone logs, and congressional schedules. Director Patel? Pelosi's expression flickered, just for a second. She hadn't expected the FBI director to personally testify. She thought this was just Republican members asking hostile questions she could deflect. This was different. Patel stood, walked to the witness table with a thick binder, looked at the committee, looked at Pelosi, and began speaking in that calm, prosecutorial voice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by making something very clear. This is not a political investigation. This is a financial crimes investigation conducted by the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. We have spent 8 months analyzing trading records, phone records, congressional calendars, and classified briefing logs. He paused. What we found is a systematic pattern of insider trading, spanning 15 years and resulting in approximately $140 million in ill-gotten gains. The room went silent. 140 million. That number hung in the air. Let me start with a simple question, Patel said, looking directly at Pelosi. How did you and your husband accumulate a net worth of $240 million? And with that question, Nancy Pelosi's carefully prepared talking points became worthless because Patel wasn't asking about specific trades or legislative processes. He was asking the fundamental question that nobody had ever forced her to answer. Where did all that money come from? Pelosi had her answer ready. She had been asked this question before by reporters. My husband and I have been fortunate in our business ventures and investments over many years of hard work. Let me be more specific, Patel interrupted smoothly. You entered Congress in January 1987. Your financial disclosure from that year showed a net worth of approximately $5 million. Substantial wealth. Good for you. Today, 38 years later, your net worth is $240 million. That is a 4,700% increase. I am asking how. He pulled out a chart and displayed it on the screen for everyone to see. A simple graph showing net worth over time, steady until around 2007, then exponential growth. Your congressional salary in 1987 was $89,500. It is currently $223,500. Over 38 years in Congress, your total congressional salary, even if you saved every single penny, paid no taxes, and had no living expenses, would total approximately $8 million. You made $6.8 million in salary. You are worth $240 million. Please explain the difference. Stein tried to intervene. My client's husband has significant business interests. Had, Patel corrected, past tense. We subpoenaed Paul Pelosi's tax returns. His business income from real estate ventures and consulting has averaged $130,000 per year over the past 20 years. His businesses are largely inactive. He is 85 years old. He is not building real estate empires. He is trading stocks. Patel clicked to another slide. So, let's do the actual math. Congressional salary over 38 years, $6.8 million. Paul's business income over the same period, approximately $4.9 million. Combined income, $11.7 million. Even with perfect investments, even with no taxes which you paid, even with no living expenses which you had, you cannot turn $11.7 million into $240 million. The math doesn't work. He paused. Let the committee absorb that. Unless you had an edge, unless you knew things other investors didn't know, unless you were trading on information the market didn't have access to. Patel clicked to the next slide. Here is what is really interesting. Your net worth was relatively stable from 1987 to 2007. Grew from $5 million to about $25 million over 20 years. That's reasonable. Good investment returns, successful business ventures. But then, something changed. The graph showed it clearly. A sharp upward curve starting in 2007. From 2007 to today, 18 years, your net worth went from $25 million to $240 million, an 800% growth in 18 years. What changed in 2007? He answered his own question. You became Speaker of the House. You started attending classified briefings regularly. You started having advanced knowledge of major legislation. You started knowing which companies would benefit from government contracts, which regulations were coming, which industries would be helped or hurt, and your net worth started exploding. Coincidence? Pelosi's face was flushed. This wasn't how these hearings usually went. Usually, she could deflect with broad answers about hard work and good fortune. But Patel was presenting math, numbers that didn't lie. The wealth accumulation directly correlates with your access to classified information, Patel continued. Before you had that access, normal returns. After you got access, extraordinary returns. The only explanation is that you were using that information to trade, or more specifically, giving it to your husband to trade. Patel opened a different section of his binder. Let me show you the trading pattern. The FBI analyzed every stock trade Paul Pelosi made from 2010 to 2025. We obtained the records directly from his brokers. Morgan Stanley, E-Times Trade, Charles Schwab. 387 total trades over 15 years. He displayed a spreadsheet on the screen, color-coded, with red trades highlighted. Of those 387 trades, 138 occurred within 1 week of you attending a classified briefing or receiving material non-public information about pending legislation. Those are the red ones. 138. He clicked to the next slide, showing performance metrics. Average return on those 138 trades, 41%. Average holding period, 3.2 months. These are not long-term investments. These are short-term trades designed to capture quick gains from information advantages. Another slide. For comparison, Warren Buffett, widely considered the greatest investor of all time, has averaged 20% annual returns over his 60-year career. Your husband apparently does twice that well, but only on certain trades. He clicked again. Here are the other 249 trades, the ones where you had no obvious information advantage. Stocks, unrelated to your committee work. Industries Congress wasn't legislating on. Companies not affected by bills you were working on. Average return on those trades, 8.2%. slightly below the S&P 500 average during the same period. Patel looked up from his presentation. So your husband is a below-average investor, except when you have insider information. Then he is twice as good as Warren Buffett. How do you explain that? Silence. No good answer existed. Let me show you the timing pattern. A new chart appeared. On average, Paul executed trades 2.7 days after you attended a relevant briefing or meeting. Not the same day, that would be too obvious. Not weeks later, the information would be public by then. Specifically, 2 to 3 days. Just long enough to create deniability, just short enough to capture the gain. He showed examples. December 15th, 2020. You attend classified briefing on Pfizer vaccine approval timeline. December 17th. 2 days later, Paul buys 5 million in Pfizer options. March 19th, 2020. Classified briefing on COVID economic severity. March 21st. 2 days later, Paul sells travel industry stocks. August 1st, 2022. You finalize Taiwan visit plans. August 3rd, 2 days later, Paul buys semiconductor stocks. Over and over. 138 times. Always 2 to 3 days. Always profitable. Always perfect timing. Pelosi tried to respond. My husband follows financial news, does his own research. Does he? Patel pulled out another document. We subpoenaed his internet search history, his email, his subscriptions. He doesn't subscribe to any professional trading services. Doesn't use a Bloomberg terminal or any professional research tools. He reads the Wall Street Journal and watches CNBC. That's it. Yet he somehow outperforms professional hedge fund managers who have teams of analysts and billions in resources. How? Patel shifted gears. Now let me show you how the information actually flowed. We subpoenaed phone records, both your cell phone and Paul's. Here is what we found. He displayed call logs on screen, timestamps highlighted. In 64 of the 138 suspicious trades, this exact pattern appears. He pointed to the timeline. You attend a classified briefing or sensitive meeting. Within 2 hours, you call Paul. Within 1 hour after your call to him, Paul calls his broker at Morgan Stanley. Within 24 hours, the trade is executed. Let me show you a specific example. The Pfizer trade, December 15th, 2020. A detailed timeline appeared. 9 a.m. You enter SCIF for classified briefing on Operation Warp Speed. The briefing covered FDA approval timeline for the Pfizer vaccine. This information was classified. The market didn't know approval would come the next day. 11:45 a.m. Briefing ends. You return to your office. 12:17 p.m. You call Paul. Your phone records show an 11-minute call. 1:03 p.m. Paul calls his broker, Richard Chen, at Morgan Stanley. 8-minute call. 2:30 p.m. Trade executes. Paul purchases $5 million in Pfizer call options. Strike price $40. Expiring in 3 months. Next day, December 16th, 9 a.m. FDA announces emergency approval for Pfizer vaccine. Stock price jumps from $42 to $54. Paul's options are now worth $8.7 million. Patel looked up. 48 hours. $7 million profit, based on classified information you received in a briefing. The timing is perfect. Impossible to explain without you telling Paul what you learned. Pelosi started to speak, but Patel continued. And before you say you are allowed to talk to your husband, of course you are. But let's look at the pattern of your calls. A new chart appeared. On average, you call Paul 2 to 3 times per week. Normal spousal communication. But on days when you attend classified briefings or sensitive meetings, you call him 94% of the time, within 2 hours. Why the sudden urgency to talk to your husband right after receiving non-public information? He pulled out phone records. We also recovered text messages. Paul's phone, December 15th. After your call to him, he texted his broker. Need to move fast on Pfizer. Call me as soon as possible. Why the urgency? Why move fast? What did you tell him in that 11-minute call that made him urgent? Pelosi's lawyer objected. This is speculation about the content of privileged spousal communication. It is pattern evidence, Patel countered. 64 times. Always the same pattern. Briefing, call to husband, call to broker, profitable trade. At some point, pattern becomes proof. Patel closed that section of his binder and opened another. Let me walk through 5 specific trades. The 5 most egregious examples of insider trading. Trade number 1. The Pfizer vaccine. We have discussed this. December 2020. You attended classified briefing on FDA approval timing. Same afternoon, Paul bought 5 million in Pfizer calls. Next day, FDA approved. Profit, 3,7 millions. You are asking us to believe that is coincidence? Trade number 2. The COVID crash, March 2020. You attended multiple classified briefings on COVID severity and economic projections. You knew before the public how devastating the shutdown would be. Paul sold 5 million in airline stocks, hotel stocks, cruise line stocks on March 19th through 21st. The market crashed March 23rd. He avoided 2.1 million in losses that average investors suffered. Lucky timing or insider information. Trade number 3. The infrastructure bill, July 2021. You were personally negotiating the infrastructure bill. You knew which companies would receive major contracts. Information not yet public. Paul bought 2 million in Caterpillar stock, Tesla stock, and construction company stocks. The bill passed. Those specific companies got major federal contracts. Paul made 4.8 million. Sophisticated analysis? Or you told him which companies would benefit? Trade number 4. The semiconductor subsidies. November 2021. You were drafting the CHIPS Act. 70 billion in subsidies for semiconductor manufacturers. Paul bought 4 million in NVIDIA call options before the bill's details were public. Months later, the bill passed, with massive benefits for companies exactly like NVIDIA. Profit, 3.2 million. Did he predict that, or did you tell him? Trade number 5. The Taiwan visit. August 2020. You were planning a controversial trip to Taiwan. You knew this would create international tensions and affect semiconductor supply chains. Before you announced the trip publicly, Paul bought 4 million in NVIDIA and Taiwan Semiconductor. You announced the trip. Tensions flared. Semiconductor stocks jumped on supply chain concerns. Paul made 2.8 million. How did he know to position for that? Patel looked at each committee member. 5 trades. 5 examples of perfect timing. 5 instances where Paul Pelosi somehow knew exactly what was going to happen before the market did. And in every case, it happened right after you had access to non-public information. He turned back to Pelosi. These aren't coincidences. This is a pattern. This is systematic insider trading. Patel pulled out a deposition transcript. Let me share something very damning. We gave immunity to Paul's broker, Richard Chen, at Morgan Stanley. In exchange, he provided detailed testimony about his communications with Paul. He also provided his notes. He keeps detailed records of client instructions. He read from the transcript. This is Richard Chen's testimony under oath. I am reading directly. Paul Pelosi would call me and give very specific instructions. He would say things like, Nancy says The infrastructure bill will pass with these provisions. Or Nancy says the semiconductor subsidies will be larger than expected. Or Nancy says regulation will be lighter than expected. He specifically attributed the information to Nancy multiple times. Patel looked up. Your husband's broker testified under oath that Paul told him the information came from you, not I think, or I believe, or my analysis suggests. Nancy says, direct attribution. That is direct evidence of tipping. He pulled out handwritten notes. These are Chen's notes from a call with Paul on January 21st, 2023, regarding a Microsoft trade around AI regulation. Chen wrote, Client says wife attended meetings about AI policy. Client says Nancy indicated regulation will be light touch, favorable to major tech companies. Client wants to buy $3 million in Microsoft calls. That is your husband telling his broker that you, by name, told him about regulatory policy that wasn't public yet. That is insider trading. Not alleged, not suspected, documented under oath. Pelosi's lawyers were whispering urgently among themselves. This was worse than they had expected. Much worse. They had prepared for political theater, but Patel had built a criminal case. Patel pulled out one final chart. Let me tie this all together with a comprehensive timeline of your wealth accumulation. A graph appeared showing net worth over time with specific trades marked 1,987. You enter Congress, net worth $5 million, 1987 to 2007. 20 years, net worth grows to $25 million. That's 500% growth. Good, but not extraordinary. 2007. You become speaker. You start attending classified briefings regularly. 2007 to 2010. Net worth grows to $40 million. 15 million in 3 years. 2010 to 2020. The most dramatic period. Net worth grows from 40 million to 175 million. 135 million in wealth accumulation in 1 decade. During this time, Paul made 63 trades that we have identified as insider trading based on your classified information access. Those trades generated approximately 87 million in gains, 2020 to 2025. Net worth grows from 175 million to 240 million, another 65 million. During this period, Paul made 41 insider trades, generating approximately 38 million. Patel looked directly at Pelosi. The math is simple. Your wealth grew exponentially when you had access to classified information. The trades that made the most money were the ones right after you attended classified briefings. This isn't circumstantial. This is direct correlation. You got information, Paul traded on it. You got rich, he closed his binder. That is not public service. That is not smart investing. That is corruption. The hearing had been going for 5 hours. Pelosi looked exhausted, aged. The confident politician who had entered the room was gone. In her place was someone who looked cornered, trapped by evidence that couldn't be explained away. Patel had systematically demolished every possible defense. The math didn't work. The timing was perfect. The phone records showed the information flow. The broker testified to direct tipping. The specific trades were impossible to explain except through insider information. Chairman Comer leaned forward. Madam former Speaker, Director Patel has presented extensive evidence of insider trading. I want to give you an opportunity to respond. How do you explain these coincidences? Pelosi looked at her lawyers. They whispered back and forth for almost a minute. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight. My husband makes his own investment decisions based on publicly available information and his own analysis. Then explain the Pfizer trade, Patel interrupted. Classified briefing in the morning about FDA approval timing, trade that afternoon. Approval announcement next day. 3.7 million profit in 48 hours. What publicly available information led to that trade? Silence. Explain the COVID trades. You attended classified briefings on economic severity. Paul sold travel stocks 2 days later, right before the crash. What public information told him to do that? Silence. Explain why Paul's broker testified under oath that Paul said, Nancy says, before multiple trades. What does that mean if you weren't giving him information? Pelosi's lawyer stood. Mr. Chairman, these questions call for speculation about the content of privileged spousal communications. They call for explanation of suspicious trades. Comer said, Your client can invoke privilege if she wants, but the American people deserve answers. Patel stood as well. Let me ask directly, Madam former Speaker, did you share information from classified briefings with your husband? Long pause. Pelosi looked at her lawyers. They whispered again. Finally, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, shocked faces. Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, third in line to the presidency for years, was taking the fifth. Patel's expression didn't change. Let the record reflect that the witness has invoked the Fifth Amendment. Mrs. Pelosi, did you tell your husband about the Pfizer vaccine approval before it was public? I invoke the Fifth Amendment. Did you tell him about COVID economic projections from classified briefings? Fifth Amendment. Did you tell him which companies would benefit from the infrastructure bill? Fifth Amendment. Did you tell him about semiconductor subsidies before they were public? Fifth Amendment. Patel turned to the committee. She is invoking her right against self-incrimination because answering truthfully would incriminate her for insider trading. She can't say no because the evidence proves she did share information, and she can't say yes because that would be admitting a crime. So she takes the fifth. He looked back at Pelosi. One more question. In those 64 phone calls you made to Paul within 2 hours of classified briefings, calls that were always followed by profitable trades, what did you discuss? Pelosi's voice was barely audible. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. The weather? Your grandchildren? Or classified information you had just learned? Fifth Amendment? Patel sat down. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. Comer looked at Pelosi with something akin to pity. Madam, former Speaker, do you understand how this looks? You are taking the fifth on questions about whether you shared classified information with your husband for the purpose of stock trading. The implications are devastating. Pelosi's lead attorney spoke up. My client is exercising her constitutional rights. The Fifth Amendment exists precisely for situations where the government is engaged in overreach. This isn't overreach, Comer interrupted. This is an FBI investigation that found 138 suspicious trades, perfect timing, documented phone calls, and broker testimony of direct tipping. Your client can invoke her rights, but she can't prevent us from drawing reasonable conclusions from the evidence. He looked at his fellow committee members. Based on the evidence presented today, this committee makes preliminary findings that will be included in our final report. 1. Former Speaker Pelosi and her husband Paul engaged in a pattern of stock trading that shows clear correlation with her access to classified information. 2. 138 trades over 15 years generated approximately $140 million in profits that appear to be based on insider information. 3. Phone records show a pattern of Nancy Pelosi calling Paul shortly after classified briefings, followed by Paul calling his broker, followed by profitable trades. 4. Paul Pelosi's broker testified that Paul specifically attributed information to Nancy before making trades. 5. The former speaker has invoked the Fifth Amendment, rather than answer questions about whether she shared classified information with her husband. He paused. This committee refers the matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation and potential prosecution of both Nancy and Paul Pelosi for insider trading, securities fraud, and conspiracy. We also refer the matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission for civil enforcement action and disgorgement of unlawful profits. We recommend the House Ethics Committee investigate for the historical record, though Mrs. Pelosi is no longer a member, and we recommend that Congress immediately pass legislation banning all stock trading by members and their immediate family members. The Pelosi case demonstrates exactly why this is necessary. Patel added one final statement. The FBI will continue our investigation. We will be working with the Department of Justice to seek criminal indictments. This is the largest congressional insider trading case in American history. The evidence is overwhelming, and we will pursue it to its conclusion. Comer gavelled the hearing closed. This session is adjourned. Pelosi sat motionless at the witness table for a long moment. Her lawyers gathered their materials. Staff began packing up. The cameras stopped recording. She had walked in confident. She walked out destroyed. Because taking the fifth in a congressional hearing about insider trading wasn't a legal strategy. It was an admission. Everyone watching would know exactly what it meant. She couldn't answer the questions because the truth would incriminate her. And she couldn't lie because the evidence would prove it. So, she had hidden behind the Fifth Amendment and guaranteed that she would be remembered not as the first female speaker, but as the politician who got rich off insider trading and refused to answer for it. The hearing transcript leaked within hours. Not officially, these were supposed to be closed-door proceedings, but someone on the committee made sure key portions reached the press. By evening, every major outlet had the story. Pelosi takes fifth on insider trading questions. FBI, $140 million in suspicious stock gains. Broker testifies Paul Pelosi said, Nancy says, before trades. Phone records show pattern. Classified briefing to call. To husband to profitable trade. The political world went into shock. Nancy Pelosi had been untouchable for 40 years. The most powerful woman in American politics, the woman who had stared down presidents, and she had just taken the Fifth Amendment rather than explain her husband's impossibly perfect trading record. Even Democrats couldn't defend it. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear, the phone records too damning. Within a week, the consequences began cascading. The Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation. Grand jury subpoenas went out. Paul Pelosi's broker, given immunity, provided hours of testimony about specific trades and Paul's statements attributing information to Nancy. The SEC filed civil charges seeking disgorgement of $140 million in unlawful profits. They froze the Pelosi's brokerage accounts pending the outcome. Nancy Pelosi announced she wouldn't seek re-election in 2026. She was 85, she said. Time to retire. Nobody believed the timing was coincidental. Within 3 weeks, the grand jury indicted both Nancy and Paul Pelosi. 47 counts of securities fraud, insider trading, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The indictment laid out 15 years of systematic trading on classified information. The trial was scheduled for April 2026. The Pelosi's legal team tried every maneuver. Motions to dismiss, claims of spousal privilege, arguments about classified information. Federal Judge Sarah Martinez denied them all. The defendants are charged with using classified information for illegal securities trading, she wrote in one opinion. Spousal privilege does not protect criminal conspiracy. The classified nature of the information doesn't immunize them from prosecution. It's the basis of the prosecution. 2 months before trial, Paul Pelosi, facing decades in prison at age 85, took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 12 counts of securities fraud, agreed to cooperate fully against Nancy, and agreed to testify about every conversation where she had given him information. In exchange, he received 18 months in federal prison, given his age and health, $82 million in restitution and fines, and forfeiture of the Napa Valley vineyard, where they had hosted countless political fundraisers. With her husband cooperating, Nancy had no choice. Her attorneys negotiated their own plea. She pleaded guilty to 38 counts of securities fraud and insider trading. The sentencing hearing was brief. Judge Martinez was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Pelosi, you held one of the highest positions in our government. You were third in line to the presidency. You took an oath to serve the American people. Instead, you used your position for personal enrichment. You exploited classified information that was classified to protect national security to make stock trades. You made $140 million by betraying the public trust. The message must be clear. Public office is not a path to personal wealth. Classified information is not a trading advantage. You will serve 8 years in federal prison. You will pay $127 million in fines and restitution, and you will forfeit your congressional pension." Nancy Pelosi entered federal prison at age 86. The Bureau of Prisons assigned her to FCI Alderson in West Virginia, the same prison that had housed Martha Stewart. The political world moved on quickly. Within months, Congress passed the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act 2, informally called the Pelosi Act. It banned all stock trading by members of Congress and their immediate family members. Violators faced automatic expulsion and criminal prosecution. The bill passed 418-2. Even progressives who had defended Pelosi for years voted for it because the evidence had been too clear, the corruption too blatant, the betrayal too complete. 6 months into her sentence, a reporter from the Washington Post was granted a rare prison interview with Pelosi. She looked a decade older. Prison had stripped away the armor of power, the designer suits, the perfect hair. She wore a khaki prison uniform, no makeup, gray hair pulled back. "Do you have any regrets?" the reporter asked. Pelosi was silent for a long time. Then, "I regret getting caught. I regret that it ended this way. But I don't regret the trades themselves. Paul and I worked hard. We deserve to be wealthy." The reporter was stunned. "You don't think what you did was wrong?" "I think the laws are unfair. Members of Congress should be able to invest. We have bills to pay like everyone else. If we happen to know things because of our position, why shouldn't we be able to use that information?" The interview created a firestorm. Even her few remaining defenders abandoned her. The complete lack of remorse, the entitlement, the belief that her position entitled her to profit from classified information. Her daughter, Christine, gave an interview to CNN a week later. "My mother has always believed rules don't apply to her. She spent 40 years in politics, believing she was above accountability. Even now, even in prison, she doesn't think she did anything wrong. It is sad, and it is exactly why she is there." Paul Pelosi served his 18 months in federal prison and was released at age 87, broken and penniless. The restitution and fines had taken everything: the Napa vineyard, the San Francisco mansion, the investment accounts. He moved into a modest apartment in Daly City, lived on Social Security. He died 6 months after his release of heart failure at 87 years old. The New York Times obituary was brutal. Paul Pelosi, 87, disgraced figure who exploited wife's position, dies. Nancy remained in prison. With good behavior, she would be eligible for release at age 92. Her lawyers were fighting for compassionate release based on age and health. So far, judges had denied every petition. She showed no compassion for the American people she betrayed. One judge wrote, "She showed no remorse. She doesn't deserve compassionate release." The legacy Nancy Pelosi had spent 40 years building, first female speaker, historic legislator, champion of progressive causes, was erased. History would remember her for one thing: systematic insider trading that made her $140 million. Students studying congressional ethics would read her case: the pattern of trades, the phone records, the broker's testimony, the Fifth Amendment, the complete inability to explain the coincidences. The lesson was taught in law schools, business schools, and political science classes. Public office is a public trust. You cannot use classified information for personal gain. You cannot turn your position into a personal fortune. And if you try, eventually someone will notice the pattern. Eventually, someone like Kash Patel will build a case you can't explain away. Nancy Pelosi thought she was untouchable, thought her power and political skill would protect her forever, thought nobody would dare investigate her seriously. She was wrong. The FBI did the math, mapped the timeline, pulled the phone records, got the broker to testify, and all those perfectly timed trades, the Pfizer options, the COVID sales, the semiconductor plays, the infrastructure bets, all of them became evidence. All that wealth became forfeit. All that power became a prison sentence. She had spent her career saying, "Follow the money." Finally, someone did, and it led straight to her. To the classified briefings she attended, to the phone calls she made to Paul, to the trades he made hours later, to the $140 million they made by betraying the public trust. She couldn't explain it, so she took the fifth. And everyone knew exactly what that meant.